In this lesson on personality, we'll focus on the humanistic perspective, the focus on the study of healthy people so as to understand their motives and behaviors and better treat people who aren't as healthy. The humanistic perspective runs into the immediate problem of self-reporting, as humanistic psychologists do rely on their subjects' or respondents' own self-reported experiences and feelings. If you say you're healthy, then you are. If you say you're not, then you're not. The psychologist who founded this subfield of personality theory is someone you've already learned about, Abraham Maslow, whose concept of the hierarchy of needs helps to inform some theories on motivation. A first-generation American, Maslow was born to Russian Jewish immigrants. He spent his childhood in New York City and, due to his own obstacles, anti-Semitism, bullying, etc., was once classified by a psychologist as mentally unstable. This diagnosis influenced Maslow to study psychology at university. Maslow's undergraduate studies in psychology focused on behaviorism, but as he moved to do his doctoral research, he was mentored by Alfred Adler, one of the Neo-Freudians. In time, however, Maslow came to disagree with Neo-Freudian understanding of how the mind worked, so he developed his own theory of personality, which he called the Humanistic Theory. His humanistic theory rested on the hierarchy of needs, which Maslow had based on what he thought a human being could focus on given their immediate environment. Maslow believed that, once basic needs were met, other needs, more psychosocial needs, could become the new focus. He did not, however, believe that this hierarchy was rigid. Since humans and their development is fluid, he believed that a person standing on the hierarchy of needs would also be fluid and would always respond to a person's current situation. In other words, you might have all your physiological needs met and move up to safety needs, but if you suddenly lost a physiological need, then you jumped back down to that level. In simple terms, climbing the hierarchy of needs was the process of fulfilling our potential. More specifically, reaching the top stage, self-actualization, meant getting to a place where a person could be problem-centered rather than self-centered. A stage where an individual's other needs were so well met that they could look outwardly rather than inwardly. Maslow argued that, as a need, the tendency towards self-actualization was innate. However, if this was an innate need, how were we to explain that only very few people, by Maslow's own estimate only about 1% of people, actually reached self-actualization? Since Maslow placed self-actualization at the very top of the hierarchy of needs, it was necessarily the weakest of all needs, and thus the hardest to achieve. In Maslow's own words, this need is weak and delicate and subtle and easily overcome by habit, cultural pressure, and wrong attitudes toward it. So Maslow believed that the need existed, but few people could actually attain it. Maslow identified the Jonah complex, or one's own fear of success, as an obstacle to self-actualization. The name comes from the biblical character of Jonah, who seeks to avoid his destiny to destroy Nineveh. He finds himself in the belly of a whale. This fear of one's own greatness, a greatness often suggested by nature, environment, accident, even fate, could become a problem in reaching self-actualization. Self-actualization requires courage, and often it's the courage to sacrifice one's immediate safety for the possibility of greater personal growth. Maslow also believed that a person's cultural environment might stifle self-actualization because it might impose certain norms on major segments of the population. For instance, a culture's definition of manliness might prevent a child who identifies as male from developing outwardly aimed emotions such as sympathy, kindness, and tenderness. Conversely, a child who identifies as female may never take the risks required of self-actualization because her culture does not encourage female risk-taking. Finally, Maslow believed, as Freud did, that childhood experiences may inhibit personal growth, as children from warm, secure, and friendly homes may choose experiences that lead them toward personal growth, but children who experience excessive control and coddling may never choose riskier experiences. Conversely, children who experience too much freedom may feel insecure or anxious as adults, both of which would prevent personal growth. For Maslow, the best environments for children were those which incorporated freedom within limits. where there is the right mixture of permissiveness and regulation which change over time in response to that child's development. Psychologist Carl Rogers agreed with Maslow's concept of self-actualization. He too believed that people had a tendency toward it. He tweaked Maslow's idea, though, making it a more person-centered approach, in that an individual person determined their own growth. Rogers believed that any person's tendency toward self-actualization could be fostered with the right environment. Rogers identified 3 conditions that were prerequisites for developing the proper environment that might foster self-actualization. These conditions were congruence or genuineness, unconditional positive regard, and empathy. Rogers' definition of congruence is an openness or transparency with emotion, meaning that the environment in which a child is raised values the expression of emotion, both for the child and for the people raising and educating the child. Rogers defined unconditional positive regard as basic acceptance, as the valuation of a person even in the face of that person's flaws, or an environment that incorporates an attitude of grace. Basically, as accepting people for who they are and not for who or what you want them to be. Rogers explicitly believed that people raising and educating children should exhibit unconditional positive regard toward those children, so that each child comes to understand that they are valuable even though they are flawed. Finally, Rogers defined empathy as the ability to perceive the internal frame of reference of another with accuracy, and with the emotional components and meanings which pertain thereto as if one were the person, but without ever losing the as-if condition. Rogers was emphatic that empathy is not sympathy, which Rogers defined as expressing one's awareness that someone else was in distress and that you feel compassion for them. For Rogers, differentiating the two was important, since merely expressing sympathy may leave a person feeling that they are pitied or inferior, while expressing true empathy removes a hierarchical structure. Humanistic theorists believe that the right environment leads to a positive self-concept, the collection of beliefs a person holds about themselves, and that it is critical to achieving self-actualization. A positive self-concept contributes to positive feelings about the world in general, and to a feeling of aspiring to the ideal self, the version of yourself that you want to attain. A negative self-concept contributes to feeling further apart from one's ideal self, which can in turn lead to inferiority or anxiety. A person's continuous work on ensuring a positive self-concept is seen as critical to a healthy personality because it represents self-acceptance. One of the largest obstacles to being a functioning person, irrespective of self-actualization, is a person's inability to reach self-acceptance and instead choose to bury their true self. A person may choose to bury their true self for a variety of reasons, usually associated with cultural or family pressures. For example, Humanistic Personality Theory would say that a person who knows or strongly suspects that they're gay, but who does not live an authentic life because they're afraid of losing familial support or because their culture or community frowns upon homosexuality, will feel considerable anxiety. As the name implies, Humanistic Personality Theory focuses on encouraging psychological health by encouraging the appropriate nurturing environment which fosters positive self-concept and, ultimately, the attainment of self-actualization.